When a billionaire heiress collapses on the doorstep of the one man who has every reason to turn her away, survival becomes more than just outlasting a storm. Adrian Cross never expected to see Vivian Vale again, especially not half frozen and dying on his porch in the middle of a Colorado blizzard. Their families tore each other apart years ago, leaving scars that never healed. But tonight, with his 6-year-old daughter watching and the temperature plummeting, he faces an impossible choice. Save the woman who represents everything he's tried to forget, or let the storm finish what their past started. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wind hit first. Adrian Cross heard it coming down the mountain like something alive, something hungry. It rattled the shutters of his cabin and sent the pine trees outside into a violent dance, their branches scraping against the roof with sounds that made his daughter flinch. He watched Elsie's small hands tighten around her stuffed rabbit, her eyes tracking the ceiling as if she could see through it to whatever was making all that noise. "It's just wind, baby," he said, though his voice didn't sound as steady as he wanted. "Big storm coming through. We've done this before." "I know," Elsie said, but she didn't look convinced. She was 6 years old and small for her age, with dark hair that fell into her eyes and a habit of biting her lower lip when she was scared. She did it now. Adrian moved to the wood stove and opened the iron door, checking the fire. The flames were good and strong, fed by the dry aspen he'd split last week. The heat pushed out into the small living room, but he could already feel the cold creeping in around the edges. Through the gaps in the window frames, under the door, through the walls that had been standing since before he was born. The cabin was old. It had been his grandfather's once, then his father's, and now it was his. It kept them alive, mostly, but it wasn't built for storms like this. The weather report that morning had been bad. Worse than bad. The meteorologist on the radio had used words like historic and life-threatening and do not travel under any circumstances. Adrian had spent the day preparing. He'd brought in more wood than they'd need, filled every pot and bucket with water in case the pipes froze, charged the battery packs, checked the generator. He'd done everything right, but the wind still sounded wrong. "Daddy?" Elsie's voice was small. "Yeah, Els. Are we going to be okay?" He looked at her sitting on the couch in her flannel pajamas, hugging that rabbit like it was the only solid thing in the world, and he felt the familiar weight settle on his chest. The weight that had been there since the day her mother died, since the day he became the only thing standing between this little girl and a world that didn't care how scared she was. "We're going to be fine," he said, and this time he made sure his voice didn't shake. "I promise." She nodded, wanting to believe him. The snow started 20 minutes later. It didn't build slowly. One moment there was nothing, and the next the world outside the windows disappeared into white. Adrian stood at the glass and watched it come down in sheets, thick and fast, erasing the trees, the shed, the truck parked 20 feet from the house. Within minutes he couldn't see past the porch. He checked his phone. No signal. That happened sometimes up here, especially in storms, but it still made his stomach tighten. They were alone. 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, 30 from town, and the roads were already impassable. He'd known that would happen. He'd prepared for it. But knowing and experiencing were different things. "Can I watch a movie?" Elsie asked. "Sure, baby. Pick something." She scrolled through the options on the old laptop, finally settling on something animated he'd seen 100 times. He let her. Routine helped. Normal helped. He sat beside her on the couch and pretended to watch while his mind went through the checklist again. Wood, water, food, generator, medical kit, flashlights. They had everything. They'd be fine. The temperature dropped fast. By 8 o'clock, the thermometer outside read 12 degrees and falling. Inside, the wood stove was burning hard, but Adrian could feel the cold pushing against the heat, fighting for space. He got up and checked the windows, stuffing towels into the gaps where he could feel air coming through. He added more wood to the fire. He pulled an extra blanket out of the closet and wrapped it around Elsie, who was starting to nod off against the arm of the couch. "Time for bed, Els." "I'm not tired," she mumbled, which was what she always said right before she fell asleep. "Come on." He scooped her up, rabbit and all, and carried her to the small bedroom they shared. There were 2 rooms in the cabin, this one and his. He'd given her the bigger one when she was 4, right after they moved up here full time, right after he realized he couldn't do the city anymore, couldn't do the memories, couldn't do any of it. Up here, it was just them. That was easier. He tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead, and stood there for a moment watching her breathe. She looked so much like Sarah. Same nose, same stubborn chin. Sometimes it hurt to look at her. Sometimes it was the only thing that kept him going. "Love you, Daddy," she whispered. "Love you too, baby. Sleep good." He left the door cracked and went back to the living room. The wind was worse now, hammering against the north side of the cabin in gusts that made the whole structure shudder. He fed the fire again, then stood at the window and stared out into the storm. That was when he heard it. At first he thought it was the wind. Just another branch hitting the side of the house, just debris caught in the storm. But then it came again, and this time there was no mistaking it. Someone was knocking on his door. Adrian froze. No one should be out in this. No one could be out in this. He looked at the clock. 9:47 p.m. He looked at the window, nothing but white chaos. He looked back at the door. The knock came again. Harder, desperate. He crossed the room in 4 strides and yanked the door open. The wind hit him like a fist, driving snow into his face and sucking the heat out of the cabin in an instant. He squinted against it, trying to see. And then he saw her, a woman. Collapsed halfway onto his porch, one hand still raised like she'd been knocking when her strength gave out. Her clothes were wrong, thin, expensive-looking, soaked through and frozen stiff in places. Her hair was plastered to her face. Her lips were blue. Jesus. He didn't think. He just moved. He grabbed her under the arms and dragged her inside, kicking the door shut behind him. The wind fought him for it, but he got it closed and locked, and then he was on his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he tried to figure out where to start. She wasn't unconscious. Not completely. Her eyes were open, sort of, and moving, but they didn't focus on anything. Her whole body was shaking, violent, uncontrollable tremors that looked like they hurt. "Can you hear me?" Adrian said. His voice sounded too loud in the sudden quiet of the cabin. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her mouth moved, but nothing came out except a sound that might have been a word. He needed to get her warm. That was the first thing, the only thing. He started pulling at her jacket, trying to get it off, but his hands were clumsy with adrenaline, and the fabric was stiff with ice. He yanked harder, and the zipper finally gave way. That was when he saw her face clearly for the first time. He stopped breathing. "No," he said out loud. "No, no, no." But it was. Vivian Vale. The name hit him like cold water. Vivian Vale, who he hadn't seen in 7 years. Vivian Vale, whose family had ripped his family apart and never looked back. Vivian Vale, who had stood silent while everything burned and then disappeared into her billion-dollar life, like none of it mattered. She was here, on his floor, dying. "Daddy?" He spun around. Elsie was standing in the hallway, rubbing her eyes, the blanket trailing behind her. "Go back to bed, Els." "Who is that?" "Just someone who needs help. Go back to bed. Now." Elsie stared at the woman on the floor, her eyes wide, and for a moment Adrian thought she might argue. But she didn't. She just nodded and shuffled back toward her room, glancing over her shoulder once before she disappeared. Adrian turned back to Vivian. Her eyes had closed. The shaking was getting worse. He didn't have time to process this. Didn't have time to feel whatever he was supposed to feel about the fact that Vivian Vale, had somehow ended up on his doorstep in the middle of a blizzard. He just had to move. He got her jacket off, then her sweater. Both were soaked. Her shirt underneath was wet too, clinging to her skin. He hesitated for half a second, then stripped it off. He wasn't thinking about modesty. He was thinking about hypothermia. Wet clothes would kill her faster than the cold. He grabbed the blanket off the couch and wrapped it around her, then pulled her closer to the fire. She made a sound, low, pained, but she didn't resist. Didn't seem capable of resisting. "Stay with me," Adrian muttered. He didn't know if he was talking to her or himself. "Come on. Stay with me." He needed to warm her core. That was the priority. He remembered that much from the wilderness first aid course he'd taken years ago, back when he still thought being prepared for everything could keep people safe. External heat wasn't enough. You had to raise the internal temperature. He filled a pot with water and set it on the stove to warm. Not boil, just warm. While it heated, he knelt beside her and rubbed her arms, her hands, trying to get blood moving. Her fingers were like ice. He could barely feel a pulse in her wrist. "Vivian," he said, "if you can hear me, I need you to try to wake up. Can you do that?" Nothing. The water was ready. He soaked a towel in it, wrung it out, and pressed it against her neck, her chest, anywhere he could reach under the blanket. She flinched, and that was good. Flinching meant her body was still fighting. "That's it," he said. "Come on." He kept working, warm water, dry blankets, friction. His mind was moving in two directions at once, one part focused entirely on keeping her alive, the other spinning uselessly around the same thought. What the hell is she doing here? Vivian Vale didn't belong in the mountains. She belonged in boardrooms and penthouses and magazine covers. She belonged in a world so far removed from his that they might as well have been living on different planets. And yet here she was, half dead on his floor, and he had no idea why. Her car. She must have crashed. That was the only explanation. She'd been driving, the storm caught her, and she lost control. But why was she driving up here at all? There was nothing up this road except his cabin and a whole lot of wilderness. No one came up here by accident. The shaking started to ease, not much, but enough that he could tell the warming was working. Her breathing was still shallow, but it was steady. He checked her fingers again, still cold, but not as bad. He kept the warm towels coming. It took an hour before her eyes opened. They didn't focus right away. They just stared at the ceiling, glassy and confused. Adrian leaned over her, blocking the firelight. "Vivian, can you hear me?" Her gaze drifted to his face. For a moment, there was nothing. Then something shifted. Recognition. And with it, something else. Fear, maybe. Or shame. "Adrian," she whispered. Her voice was wrecked, barely audible. "Yeah, it's me. You're okay. You're safe." Her eyes closed again, and he thought she'd passed out. But then she spoke. So quiet he almost missed it. "I'm sorry." He didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if she was apologizing for showing up, or for something that happened 7 years ago, or for something else entirely. So he just kept working, kept warming her, kept her alive. By midnight, she was stable enough that he felt comfortable leaving her by the fire for a few minutes. He checked on Elsie first, still asleep, curled up with the rabbit. Then he went to the window and looked out. The storm hadn't eased. If anything, it was worse. The snow was piled against the porch railing, and the wind was still screaming through the trees. He couldn't see anything beyond the glass except white and darkness, which meant Vivian's car was out there somewhere, buried, and no one was coming to help. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Maybe not for days. He looked back at her, still wrapped in blankets by the fire, her hair drying in messy tangles around her face. She looked smaller than he remembered. Fragile. That was wrong. Vivian Vale wasn't fragile. Vivian Vale was sharp edges and cold decisions, and the kind of power that crushed people without even noticing. Except the woman on his floor didn't look powerful. She looked broken. He went back to her and sat down, close enough to monitor her breathing, but far enough that he didn't feel like he was crowding her. The fire crackled, the wind howled, and Adrian Cross sat in the small circle of warmth and wondered what the hell happened to bring them both to this moment. She stirred around 1 in the morning. Her eyes opened again, clearer this time, and she looked at him, really looked at him. "Where am I?" she asked. "My cabin, up on Ridgeline Road." She processed that. "How did I—" "You knocked on my door, don't remember?" She shook her head slightly, then winced like the movement hurt. "Your car?" he asked. "Crashed. About a mile down the road. Maybe more. I don't know. I walked." "You walked? In this?" She didn't answer. Didn't need to. The evidence was all over her. "That was stupid," he said. It came out harsher than he meant, but he didn't take it back. "I know," she said quietly. They sat in silence for a moment. There were 1,000 questions he wanted to ask, and none of them felt right. So instead, he asked the only one that mattered. "Why are you here, Vivian?" She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd opened that door, he saw something in her face that wasn't just cold or pain or confusion. He saw exhaustion, the kind that went deeper than the storm, deeper than tonight. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. And Adrian didn't know what scared him more, The fact that she said it, or the fact that he believed her? The hours crawled by. Vivian drifted in and out of something that wasn't quite sleep and wasn't quite consciousness. Adrian stayed close, checking her pulse, her temperature, making sure the fire didn't die. He didn't sleep, couldn't. His mind was too loud. He kept replaying the last time he'd seen her, 7 years ago, at the funeral. Not Sarah's funeral. He'd barely been functional at that one. This was 6 months later, his father's funeral. The man who'd married Vivian's mother when Adrian was 19 and Vivian was 17, creating a blended family that never blended. It had been a disaster from the start. Adrian's dad and Vivian's mom, both trying to glue together the broken pieces of their lives, and all they'd managed to do was create new fractures. The marriage lasted 3 years before it imploded. Messi didn't even begin to cover it. Lawyers, accusations, money disappearing and reappearing in the wrong accounts. Adrian's dad died 6 months after the divorce was finalized, and the official cause was a heart attack, but Adrian knew better. Stress, betrayal. A man who tried to build something good and watched it collapse. And Vivian had stood at that funeral in a black dress that probably cost more than Adrian's truck, her face blank, and said nothing. Not to him. Not to anyone. She'd just stood there and then she'd left. He'd hated her for that. For the silence, for the money, for the fact that she'd walked away into her perfect, untouchable life while he was left picking up pieces. And now she was here. Around 3 in the morning, she spoke again. "Is there someone else here?" Adrian looked up from the fire. "My daughter. She's 6. She's asleep." Vivian's eyes widened slightly. "You have a daughter?" "Yeah." "I didn't know." "Why would you?" That landed harder than he meant it to, and he saw her flinch, but she didn't look away. "What's her name?" Vivian asked. "Elsie." "That's pretty." He didn't respond, didn't want to make small talk, didn't want to pretend this was normal. But Vivian kept talking anyway, her voice still rough but stronger than before. "I'm sorry I came here. I didn't mean to. I didn't plan this." "Then what were you doing on this road?" She closed her eyes. "I was trying to get away." "From what?" "Everything." It wasn't an answer, not really. But something in the way she said it made him pause. He'd heard that tone before. Heard it in his own voice, in the months after Sarah died, when people asked how he was doing, and all he could say was fine, because the real answer was too big and too broken to fit into words. "You should rest," he said finally. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because I'm afraid if I do, I'll wake up and you'll have thrown me back out into the storm." He stared at her. "I'm not going to do that." "You should." "Maybe, but I'm not." She looked at him for a long moment, and he couldn't read her expression. Then she closed her eyes again. "Thank you," she whispered. Adrian didn't respond. He just fed the fire and listened to the wind. By dawn, the temperature inside the cabin had dropped another 5 degrees despite the fire burning full blast. Adrian could see his breath when he exhaled. He checked the thermometer outside. -8. And still dropping. The generator was in the shed, 30 feet from the house. He'd have to go out there, get it running, bring back more wood. The thought of stepping into that cold made his chest tighten, but there was no choice. He looked at Vivian. She was asleep now, really asleep, her breathing deep and even. The color had come back to her face, at least a little. She'd probably live. He checked on Elsie next. She was awake, sitting up in bed, staring at him with those big eyes. "Morning, baby," he said quietly. "Is she still here?" "Yeah." "Who is she?" Adrian sat down on the edge of the bed. "How did you explain Vivian Vale to a 6-year-old? How did you explain any of this?" "She's someone I used to know a long time ago. Her car crashed in the storm, and she needed help." "Is she going to stay?" "I don't know." Elsie thought about that. Then she said, "She was really cold last night." "She was, but she's okay now." "Good." Elsie hugged her rabbit. "I'm hungry." "I'll make breakfast, but I need to go outside first, okay? Just for a few minutes. I need you to stay inside and stay warm." "Okay." He kissed her forehead and stood up. Going outside was worse than he'd expected. The wind hit him like a wall, and the cold went straight through his jacket, his layers, everything. He could barely see the shed through the snow. He pushed forward anyway, head down, boots crunching through drifts that were already past his knees. The generator started on the third pull, thank God. He let it run for a minute to make sure it was stable, then grabbed an armful of wood from the stack beside the shed and started back. He was halfway to the cabin when he saw it. Tracks, leading from the road to his porch. Vivian's tracks, half filled with snow but still visible. He followed them with his eyes, tracing the path she must have taken. A mile, she'd said, maybe more. In the dark, in this storm. She should have died. He stared at the tracks for a moment, then shook his head and kept moving. Inside, the cabin was marginally warmer with the generator running. He added wood to the fire and started coffee. Elsie wandered out of her room, still in her pajamas, and climbed onto the couch. "Can I have toast?" she asked. "Sure." He was pulling bread out of the cabinet when Vivian spoke. "Is that coffee?" He turned. She was sitting up, still wrapped in the blanket, her hair a mess and her eyes ringed with exhaustion. But she was awake, alert. "Yeah," he said. "Can I have some?" He hesitated, then poured a second cup and brought it to her. She took it with both hands, like she was afraid she'd drop it, and sipped carefully. "Thank you," she said again. Elsie was watching from the couch, curious but quiet. Vivian looked at her. "Hi." "Hi," Elsie said. "I'm Vivian." "I'm Elsie." "That's a really pretty name." Elsie didn't say anything, just hugged her rabbit tighter. Adrian went back to making toast. The silence in the cabin was thick and awkward, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the wind still battering the walls outside. Finally, Vivian spoke again. "How long is the storm supposed to last?" "Another day, at least. Maybe 2. "And the roads?" "Won't be clear for days after that. We're snowed in." She nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer but didn't want to hear it. "You're stuck here," Adrian said flatly. "With us." "I know. And you still haven't told me why you came." She looked down at her coffee. "I told you. I didn't know where else to go." "That's not an answer, Vivian. It's the only one I have right now." He wanted to push, wanted to demand the truth, but Elsie was watching and he could see the exhaustion in Vivian's face, and he decided it could wait. "Fine," he said, "but we're going to talk. Eventually." "Okay." He brought Elsie her toast and sat down at the small table with his own coffee. The three of them ate in silence, the storm still raging outside, and Adrian tried not to think about how surreal this was. Vivian Vale, in his cabin, eating toast. The day passed slowly. Adrian kept the fire going, checked the generator, and tried to keep Elsie entertained. She wanted to play a board game, so they did. Vivian watched from the couch, wrapped in the blanket, not saying much. By afternoon, the cabin felt claustrophobic. Too small for 3 people, and all the history between them. Adrian found himself watching Vivian when she wasn't looking. She'd changed since the last time he saw her. Not just older, though she was that too, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, but something else. Quieter, less certain. The Vivian he remembered had walked into rooms like she owned them. This Vivian looked like she was trying not to take up space. Around 4, Elsie fell asleep on the couch, curled up under a blanket. Adrian covered her with another one and checked the fire. Vivian stood up, slowly, testing her legs. She winced but stayed upright. "You should sit back down," Adrian said. "I'm fine." "You almost died last night." "I know, I was there." He didn't smile. "What happened to your car?" "I lost control. Black ice, I think. Went into a ditch." "And you decided to walk." "I didn't have a choice. My phone was dead. I couldn't stay in the car. It was freezing. So I walked." "Toward what? You didn't know my cabin was here." She hesitated. "I did, actually." That stopped him. "What?" "I knew you lived up here. I looked it up a while ago." "Why?" "I don't know." "That's a lie." She met his eyes. "Yeah, it is." They stood there, staring at each other across the small room. The fire hissed, the wind howled, and Adrian felt something shift, some wall he'd built years ago starting to crack. "Why are you really here, Vivian?" She looked away first. "I told you." "No, the real reason." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Because I couldn't do it anymore. Do what? Any of it. The company, the board meetings, the smiling for cameras and pretending everything's fine when it's not. I couldn't. Her voice cracked, and she stopped. Adrian waited. I lost control, she said finally, of all of it. And I didn't know how to get it back, so I got in my car and I started driving, and I ended up here. Why here? Because you're the only person I know who ever told me the truth, even when it hurt. He didn't know what to say to that. She looked at him, her eyes red. I'm sorry. For everything. For what my mother did to your dad. For not saying anything at the funeral. For disappearing. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air between them. Adrian took a breath. Okay. That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say, Vivian? That it's fine? It's not. What happened? What your family did? It destroyed my dad. And you just stood there. I know. So no, it's not fine. But you're here and you almost died, and I'm not going to throw you out into a blizzard. So yeah. Okay. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. They stood there in the firelight, two people who used to know each other and didn't anymore, trying to figure out what came next. Outside, the storm kept falling. The temperature kept dropping. Adrian watched the thermometer through the window as the numbers fell. -12, then -15. The wood stove was burning through fuel faster than he'd planned, and he was starting to do math in his head that he didn't like. 3 days of storm, maybe 4. 2 cords of wood left in the shed. If they burned at this rate, they'd run out before the roads cleared. He didn't say any of this out loud. Vivian had moved to the chair by the fire, still wrapped in blankets, nursing her second cup of coffee. She hadn't said much since their conversation, just sat there staring at the flames like they held answers she couldn't find anywhere else. Elsie was awake again, playing quietly on the floor with a set of wooden blocks that had been Adrian's when he was her age. The silence was starting to feel permanent. I should check your feet, Adrian said finally. Vivian looked up. What? Frostbite. You walked a mile through that. I need to see if there's damage. She hesitated, then nodded and pulled her legs out from under the blanket. Her feet were bare. He'd taken her boots off last night when he was stripping the wet clothes. And even from across the room, he could see they were red and swollen. He knelt down in front of her and took her left foot in his hands, turning it gently to examine the toes. The skin was angry-looking, but not black. That was good. Black meant tissue death. Red just meant pain. Does this hurt? He pressed lightly on her big toe. Yes. Good. Pain means you've got circulation. Doesn't feel good. It's better than the alternative. He checked the other foot. Same story. Swollen, painful, but alive. She'd been lucky. Stupid lucky. You're going to be sore for a few days, he said, lowering her foot back to the floor. But I don't think there's permanent damage. That's something, I guess. More than something. You could have lost toes, or worse. She pulled the blanket back around herself. I know. Elsie looked up from her blocks. Did you really crash your car? Vivian turned to her, and for the first time since she'd woken up, something like a smile touched her face. Yeah, I did. Was it scary? Very scary. Did it flip over? Elsie, Adrian warned. It's okay, Vivian said. No, it didn't flip. It just slid off the road and got stuck. But I couldn't get it out. Why not? Because there was too much snow and the wheels were stuck in a ditch. Elsie thought about that, building a tower with her blocks. My daddy can fix stuff. Maybe he can fix your car. Maybe, Vivian said, though they both knew the car wasn't getting fixed anytime soon. Adrian stood up and went to the kitchen. Dinner needed to happen, and their options were limited. He pulled out a can of soup, some crackers, and what was left of yesterday's bread. Not much, but it would work. While the soup heated on the stove, he found himself watching them. Elsie had gone back to her blocks, talking to herself in that way kids do when they're narrating their own games. Vivian was watching her too, something unreadable in her expression. She looks like you, Vivian said quietly. Adrian stirred the soup. She looks like her mother. I didn't know you were married. I wasn't, not legally. Oh. He could feel her curiosity, the questions building behind her careful tone, But he didn't elaborate. Sarah was a door he kept closed most of the time, and he wasn't about to open it for Vivian Vale. They ate dinner at the small table, the three of them crowded together in the flickering firelight. Elsie chattered between spoonfuls of soup, asking Vivian questions about where she lived and what kind of car she drove and whether she had any pets. Vivian answered patiently, her voice soft, and Adrian noticed she didn't mention the penthouse or the company or any of the things that made her Vivian Vale billionaire. She just talked to Elsie like a normal person. It was strange, unsettling even. After dinner, Elsie wanted to show Vivian her books. She dragged a stack over to the couch and climbed up beside her, spreading them out like treasures. "This one's my favorite," Elsie said, holding up a battered copy of a picture book about a bear. "Daddy reads it to me every night." "Every night?" Vivian asked. "Well, most nights. Sometimes he's too tired." Adrian was washing dishes in the sink, but he could hear the smile in Vivian's voice when she said, "I bet he is." "Can you read?" Elsie asked. "Yes." "Will you read this one to me?" Vivian glanced at Adrian. He shrugged. "If you want." So Vivian read. Her voice was still rough from the cold, but she made it work, doing different voices for the characters and pausing at the right moments to let Elsie point at the pictures. Adrian dried the dishes slowly, listening, and something about the scene felt wrong. Not bad wrong, just wrong in the sense that it didn't fit. Vivian Vale didn't belong on a threadbare couch in a falling-apart cabin reading children's books to a 6-year-old. But there she was. By the time the story ended, Elsie was yawning. Adrian scooped her up and carried her to bed, tucking her in under 2 blankets and the quilt his grandmother had made 40 years ago. "Is Vivian staying?" Elsie asked sleepily. "For now. I like her." "That's good, baby." "She's sad, though." Adrian paused. "What makes you say that?" "I don't know. She just is." He kissed her forehead. "Get some sleep." When he came back out, Vivian was standing by the window, staring out into the dark. The storm had eased slightly. The wind wasn't screaming anymore, just a steady howl, but the snow was still coming down. "She's a sweet kid," Vivian said without turning around. "She is." "You're doing a good job with her." Adrian didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't. He just added more wood to the fire and sat down on the couch. Vivian turned to face him. "Can I ask you something?" "Depends on what it is." "What happened to her mother?" He should have known that was coming. "Cancer, 3 years ago." "I'm sorry." "Yeah, me too." "Were you together long?" "Long enough." Vivian sat down in the chair across from him, pulling her knees up to her chest. "You don't like talking about it." "Not really." "I get that." They sat in silence for a while. The fire crackled. The wind rattled the windows, and Adrian felt the weight of all the things they weren't saying pressing down on the room. Finally, Vivian spoke again. "I meant what I said earlier. I'm sorry. For all of it." "You already apologized." "I know, but I don't think you believe me." "I don't know what I believe." She looked at him, her eyes catching the firelight. "Your dad was a good man." "Don't." "He was. He tried so hard to make it work." "I said don't." Adrian's voice came out harder than he meant, and Vivian flinched. "You don't get to talk about him like you knew him, like you cared." "I did care." "You had a hell of a way of showing it." "What was I supposed to do, Adrian? I was 20 years old, my mother was tearing everything apart, and I didn't know how to stop her." "You could have said something, anything, instead you just disappeared." "Because I didn't know what to say." Her voice cracked, and she stopped, taking a breath. "I didn't know what to say, and I was ashamed, and I thought if I just stayed away, it would be easier for everyone. It wasn't. I know that now." Adrian stared at the fire, his jaw tight. Part of him wanted to keep pushing, keep making her feel every bit of the anger he'd carried for 7 years. But another part, the part that had dragged her inside and kept her alive, was tired. Tired of being angry. Tired of holding on to something that couldn't be fixed. "Why did you really look me up?" he asked quietly. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Because I wanted to know if you were okay. If you'd found something better than what we left you with." "And?" "I don't know. Your address is public record. That's all I found." "So you drove up here to see for yourself?" No, I drove up here because I didn't know where else to go. But yeah, I knew you were here, and maybe some part of me hoped you'd help me, even though I had no right to ask. He looked at her then, really looked at her. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by an old flannel shirt he'd found for her and a pair of sweatpants that were too big. Her hair was still drying, messy, and unstyled. Without the armor of wealth and power, she just looked like a woman who'd run out of options. "What happened, Vivian?" he asked. "What happened that made you get in a car and drive into a blizzard?" She wrapped her arms around her knees, making herself smaller. "Everything. Nothing. I don't know how to explain it." "Try." She took a shaky breath. "Do you know what it's like to have everything you're supposed to want and still feel like you're drowning?" "No." "I do. I've spent the last 7 years building this company, making money, doing everything right. And somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I don't even know who I am anymore outside of board meetings and profit margins." "So you ran." "So I ran." "That's not a plan, Vivian." "I know it's not, but I couldn't stay there. I couldn't keep pretending." Adrian leaned back against the couch, exhausted. "You're a mess." "I know." "You could have died." "I know that too." "And you still think coming here was a good idea?" She looked at him, her eyes wet. "I think it was the only idea I had left." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Adrian rubbed his face with both hands, trying to think. This was insane. All of it. Vivian Vale, sitting in his cabin, falling apart in front of him. A week ago, if someone had told him this would happen, he would have laughed. But here they were. "You can stay," he said finally, "until the road's clear. After that, I don't know. We'll figure it out. Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I'm not the kind of person who throws someone out into a storm." "I know." "Good." He stood up and went to check the fire. Behind him, he heard Vivian shift in the chair, heard her breath hitch like she was trying not to cry. He didn't turn around, didn't know what he'd say if he did. The night stretched on. Around 11, the generator sputtered and died. Adrian swore under his breath and pulled on his coat, bracing himself for another trip to the shed. The wind hit him the second he opened the door, colder than before, and he had to lean into it to make forward progress. The generator had run out of gas. He refilled it, hands shaking from the cold, and got it started again. But when he checked the fuel cans, his stomach sank. 2 cans left, maybe a day's worth if they were careful. He stood in the shed for a moment, doing the math. The storm wasn't supposed to break until tomorrow night at the earliest. The roads wouldn't be clear for 2 days after that, minimum. They were going to run out of fuel before help arrived, which meant they'd have to rely entirely on the wood stove, which meant he'd need to ration the wood, which meant it was going to get very, very cold. When he got back inside, Vivian was still in the chair, staring at nothing. She looked up when he came in, shaking snow off his coat. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Fine." "You're a terrible liar." He hung up his coat and sat down. "We're low on fuel for the generator. We'll have to shut it down tomorrow to make it last." "What does that mean?" "It means it's going to get colder. A lot colder." She absorbed that. "Okay." "Okay? That's it? What else am I supposed to say? I don't exactly have a lot of options here." "You could panic. Most people would." "I'm too tired to panic." Adrian almost smiled. Almost. They sat there for a while longer, not talking, just existing in the small bubble of warmth the fire provided. Outside, the storm kept falling, relentless and indifferent. Eventually, Vivian stood up. "I should try to sleep." "You can take my room. I'll stay out here." "I'm not taking your bed, Adrian. You almost died yesterday. Take the bed." "Where are you going to sleep?" "Here, on the couch. I've done it before." She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't, just nodded and walked toward the back of the cabin. At the doorway, she paused and turned back. "Adrian?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for not turning me away." He didn't answer, just watched her disappear into the darkness of the hallway. Alone in the firelight, Adrian sat and listened to the cabin settle around him. The wind, the creak of old wood, the hiss of the flames. This place had been in his family for 3 generations, and it had seen its share of storms. But this felt different. This felt like something shifting, like the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as it used to be. He thought about his father. About the man who tried so hard to build something good and died broken. About the bitterness Adrian had carried since then, the anger that had kept him warm on cold nights. And he thought about Vivian, asleep in his bed, carrying her own kind of broken. Maybe Elsie was right. Maybe she was sad. Maybe they all were. He added another log to the fire and pulled a blanket over himself, settling into the worn cushions of the couch. Sleep didn't come easy, but eventually it came. He woke to the sound of Elsie crying. It was still dark, 3 a.m, according to the clock on the wall, and the cabin had gone cold. The fire had burned down to embers, and the generator had stopped again. Adrian threw off the blanket and rushed to Elsie's room, his breath fogging in the freezing air. She was sitting up in bed, sobbing, her little body shaking. Hey, it's okay, Adrian said, scooping her up. What's wrong, baby? I'm cold, she whimpered. I'm so cold, Daddy. He wrapped her in blankets and carried her to the living room, holding her tight against his chest. She was right. She was ice cold. The temperature in the cabin had dropped fast, and even with the blankets, she was shivering. I know, Els. I know. I'm going to fix it. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't that simple. The fire needed wood, and he needed to get the generator running again, and Elsie needed to warm up now. Vivian appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale. What's wrong? She's freezing. We all are. I need to get the fire going. What can I do? Stay with her? He handed Elsie to Vivian, who took her awkwardly, like she wasn't sure what to do with a 6-year-old. But then Elsie buried her face in Vivian's shoulder, still crying, and Vivian's arms tightened around her instinctively. It's okay, Vivian murmured. You're okay. Adrian didn't wait. He grabbed wood from the pile by the stove and started rebuilding the fire, blowing on the embers until flames caught. The heat started to spread, but it wasn't enough. Not fast enough. He looked at Vivian holding Elsie, both of them shaking, and made a decision. Come here, he said. Both of you. By the fire. Vivian carried Elsie over, and Adrian pulled the couch closer to the stove. He grabbed every blanket in the cabin, thick ones, thin ones, quilts, throws, and started piling them on. Sit, he said. Vivian sat down with Elsie still in her arms. Adrian wrapped blankets around them, layering them like insulation. Then he sat down beside them and pulled the outermost blanket over all 3 of them. What are you doing? Vivian asked. Body heat. It's the fastest way to warm her up. Adrian, just don't argue, please. She went quiet. They sat there, huddled together under the mountain of blankets, with Elsie sandwiched between them. The fire crackled and grew, pushing heat into the small space they'd created. Slowly, the shivering started to ease. Elsie's breathing evened out first, then Vivian's. Adrian felt the tension leave their bodies as the warmth seeped in, and he realized he'd stopped shaking too. Is this okay? Vivian asked quietly. It's fine. I know this is... It's fine, Vivian. We're just trying not to freeze. She nodded, and they fell into silence again. Time passed. Adrian didn't know how long. Could have been 20 minutes. Could have been an hour. He just sat there, feeling the heat from the fire, and the warmth of the bodies pressed against him, and thought about how strange it was that this moment existed. That of all the ways his life could have gone, it had led to this. A blizzard, a broken woman from his past, and his daughter sleeping between them like it was the most natural thing in the world. She's asleep, Vivian whispered. Adrian looked down. Elsie's eyes were closed, her face peaceful. Yeah. She's brave. Walking through that storm to get here. That took guts. She didn't have a choice. Neither did I. He didn't respond to that. They sat there as the fire burned and the storm howled and the night slowly crawled toward morning. And somewhere in the warmth and the exhaustion and the strange intimacy of survival, Adrian felt something shift. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not trust. But maybe the beginning of something like understanding. Adrian? Vivian's voice was soft, barely audible. Yeah? I'm glad I ended up here, even if it was stupid, even if I almost died. I'm glad it was your door I knocked on. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded in the darkness and kept the fire burning. Dawn came with no sun, just a gray half-light that filtered through the snow-covered windows, turning the cabin into something like a cave. Adrian woke with a crick in his neck and Elsie's elbow digging into his ribs. Vivian was still asleep on his other side, her head tilted back against the couch, her breathing deep and even. The fire had died down to ash. He extracted himself carefully from the pile of blankets and bodies, trying not to wake either of them. His joints protested. Sleeping upright on a couch would do that. But he ignored it and went straight to the wood stove. The cabin was brutally cold. He could see his breath hanging in the air like smoke. He built the fire back up, feeding it kindling first, then larger pieces, watching the flames catch and grow. It would take time to warm the place again. Too much time. Behind him, Vivian stirred. "What time is it?" Her voice was rough with sleep. 6:30, maybe 7. "It's freezing." "Yeah." She pulled the blankets tighter around herself, careful not to disturb Elsie. "How long was I asleep?" "Few hours." "And you?" "Same." She looked at him, really looked, and he knew what she was seeing, the exhaustion, the worry he was trying to keep off his face. He turned back to the fire. "How bad is it?" she asked. "How bad is what?" "Don't do that. Don't pretend everything's fine when it's not. I can see it in your face." Adrian closed the stove door and sat back on his heels. "We're burning through wood faster than I planned, and the generator's almost out of fuel. If the storm doesn't break soon, we're going to have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind where we run out of heat before we run out of storm." Vivian absorbed that, her face going tight. "Okay, so what do we do?" "We conserve. Keep the fire smaller. Turn off the generator except for emergencies. Layer up." "That's it?" "That's it." She looked down at Elsie, still sleeping peacefully under the blankets, oblivious to the mathematics of survival happening around her. "She's going to be okay, right?" "Yes." "You don't sound sure." "I'm sure." He wasn't, but he said it anyway, because that's what you did. You said the thing that needed to be said, and you figured out how to make it true later. Vivian didn't look convinced, but she nodded. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind. It had changed pitch overnight, gone from a howl to something lower, more persistent. The kind of sound that got into your head and stayed there. "I should check outside," Adrian said, "see how much snow we got." "I'll come with you." "You should stay with Elsie." "She's asleep." "And I'm not useless, Adrian. Let me help." He wanted to argue, but the truth was he could use the help. "Fine. But bundle up. It's going to be worse than yesterday." They dressed in layers, long underwear, sweaters, coats, hats, gloves. Vivian borrowed a pair of his old boots, 2 sizes too big, and tied them tight. When they stepped outside, the cold hit like a physical blow. The world had disappeared. Snow covered everything. The truck, the shed, the woodpile. Drifts reached halfway up the cabin walls in places, sculpted by the wind into strange, smooth curves. The sky was a flat gray ceiling pressing down on them, and the snow was still falling, lighter now, but steady. "Jesus," Vivian breathed. Adrian didn't respond. He was already moving, wading through snow up to his thighs toward the shed. The generator was still running, barely, coughing like it was sick. He checked the fuel gauge, less than a quarter tank left. He shut it down. "What are you doing?" Vivian called from the porch. "Saving what's left. We'll only run it when we have to." "What counts as having to?" "I'll know it when I see it." He made his way to the woodpile next, brushing snow off the tarp that covered it. The wood underneath was dry, thank God, but there was less than he remembered. Maybe a cord left. At this rate, maybe 2 days' worth if they were careful. Vivian had followed him, struggling through the deep snow. "How are we doing?" "We're doing." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got right now." She looked like she wanted to push, but something in his face must have stopped her. Instead, she said, "What can I do?" "Help me carry wood inside, as much as we can fit." They worked in silence, making trip after trip from the woodpile to the cabin. Adrian's arms ached, his back ached. The cold turned his fingers numb even through the gloves, but he kept moving, and so did Vivian. She didn't complain, didn't ask for breaks, just hauled wood like her life depended on it, which, technically, it did. By the time they finished, they'd stacked enough wood inside to last through the day and into the night. Adrian's shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cold, and Vivian was breathing hard, her face flushed. "Good?" she asked. "Good enough." Inside, Elsie was awake, wrapped in blankets on the couch, watching them with wide eyes. Where did you go? She asked. Just getting more wood, baby, Adrian said. We're all set now. I'm hungry. I'll make breakfast. He scrounged together oatmeal and the last of the powdered milk, heating it on the stove. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and it was food. They ate sitting close to the fire. The three of them squeezed onto the couch again because the rest of the cabin was too cold. Is the storm still going? Elsie asked. Yeah, but it's getting better. Should be done by tonight. Then can Vivian's car get fixed? We'll see. Elsie looked at Vivian. Do you have to leave when your car gets fixed? Vivian's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. She glanced at Adrian, then back at Elsie. I don't know yet, sweetie. We'll have to see. I hope you don't. Elsie, Adrian said quietly. What? I like her. Vivian's face did something complicated, and she looked down at her oatmeal. After breakfast, the day stretched out long and cold. There wasn't much to do. No electricity meant no laptop, no movies, no distractions. Just the four walls of the cabin and each other. Elsie wanted to play cards, so they did. Then she wanted to draw, so Vivian found some paper and crayons, and they sat at the table together, Elsie narrating each picture in exhaustive detail, while Vivian listened with an attention that seemed genuine. Adrian watched them from the couch, pretending to read a book, but mostly just thinking. About the wood. About the cold. About what happened if the storm didn't break. About the fact that Vivian Vale was sitting at his table drawing pictures with his daughter like it was normal. Nothing about this was normal. Around noon, the temperature inside the cabin dropped again. Adrian checked the thermometer, 48 degrees, cold enough that he could see his breath when he exhaled. We need to stay in one room, he said. Concentrate the heat. Which room? Vivian asked. This one. We'll bring the mattresses out here, sleep by the fire. It'll be warmer. Okay. They dragged Elsie's mattress out first, then Adrian's. They laid them on the floor in front of the stove, overlapping slightly, and piled every blanket they owned on top. It looked like a nest, or a bunker. Cozy, Vivian said, and there was something almost like humor in her voice. It'll work. Elsie thought it was an adventure. She climbed onto the mattresses and rolled around, making herself a burrito in one of the quilts. This is like camping. Sure, baby, just like camping. The afternoon dragged. The cabin creaked and settled around them, groaning under the weight of snow on the roof. The fire crackled. Elsie played with her blocks. Vivian sat wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. Adrian found himself watching her again, wondering what she was thinking, wondering if she regretted coming here, wondering if he regretted letting her stay. Can I ask you something? He said finally. Vivian looked up. Okay. What did you think was going to happen when you got in your car and started driving? She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I didn't think. That was the problem. I needed to get away. From the city. From the company. From all of it. So you drove toward the mountains in the middle of winter. During a storm. I know how it sounds. It sounds like you wanted to die. No. Her voice was sharp, defensive. That's not... No. Then what? She pulled the blanket tighter. I wanted to disappear. There's a difference. Not much of one. There is to me. Adrian leaned back against the couch. You know what I think? I think you wanted someone to stop you, to pull you back. And you drove up here because some part of you knew I would. Vivian's eyes went bright. That's not fair. Maybe not, but it's true. You don't know what it's like, Adrian. You don't know what it's like to have everything and still feel like you have nothing. You're right, I don't. But I know what it's like to lose everything, and I know that running doesn't fix it. So what does? I don't know, but not that. She looked away, blinking hard. Elsie was watching them now, her little face worried, and Adrian realized they were doing that thing adults do when they forget kids are listening. Sorry, Els, he said. We're just talking. Are you mad at Vivian? No, baby, we're figuring some things out. Elsie seemed to accept that. She went back to her blocks, but Adrian could tell she was still listening. Vivian wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. I don't know what else to do. Then just be here. That's all. She nodded, but she didn't look at him. The afternoon turned into evening, the gray light outside fading to black. Adrian kept the fire going, feeding it carefully, rationing the wood. The temperature inside held steady at around 50 degrees, cold but survivable. They ate dinner, canned chili heated over the fire. Sitting on the mattresses, the three of them huddled together. Elsie was quieter than usual, and Adrian wondered if she was picking up on the tension. Kids always knew when something was wrong, even when you tried to hide it. After dinner, Vivian offered to read to Elsie again. They sat close to the fire, Vivian's voice soft and steady, and Adrian found himself listening too. The story was about a mouse who went on an adventure to find his family. It was simple, sweet, the kind of thing that usually made Elsie smile. But tonight, when the story ended with the mouse finding his way home, Elsie started crying. "Hey, what's wrong?" Vivian asked, pulling her close. "I want it to stop being cold," Elsie sobbed. "I want the storm to go away." "I know, sweetie, I know. I'm scared." Adrian moved to sit beside them, pulling Elsie into his lap. "Listen to me, Els. We're going to be okay. I promise. But what if— No, what ifs? We're going to be okay." She buried her face in his chest, still crying, and Adrian held her tight, rocking slightly. Over her head, his eyes met Vivian's. She looked scared, too. "She's right to be scared," Vivian said quietly. This is bad, isn't it?" Adrian didn't answer right away. Then he said, "We're going to make it through the night. That's all we need to worry about right now. And tomorrow? We'll worry about tomorrow when it gets here." Vivian nodded, but he could see the doubt in her face. They settled in for the night early, all three of them piling onto the mattresses with every blanket they had. Adrian built the fire up as high as he dared, then lay down between Elsie and the stove, Vivian on Elsie's other side. "This is like a sleepover," Elsie mumbled, her voice drowsy. "Yeah, baby, just like that." "Will you stay with us, Vivian?" "I'm right here." "Promise?" "I promise." Elsie fell asleep quickly, her breathing evening out. Adrian lay awake, listening to the wind, watching the firelight dance on the ceiling. Beside him, Vivian was awake too. He could tell by the way she was breathing. "Adrian?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Yeah?" "Thank you for not giving up on me. I haven't done anything. You kept me alive. That's not nothing." He didn't respond, didn't know what to say. "I mean it," she continued. "If you'd turned me away that first night, I wouldn't have. You would have had every right to. Maybe, but I didn't, so stop thinking about it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm sorry I brought my mess to your door." "You already said that." "I know, but I keep thinking, you have your life here, you and Elsie, and I just showed up and made everything harder." "You didn't make a choice to crash your car, Vivian. I made a choice to drive in a storm." "Yeah, you did. But you're here now and we're dealing with it, so stop beating yourself up." She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "That's all I'm good at lately." Adrian turned his head to look at her. In the firelight, her face was softer, younger somehow, or maybe just more honest. "You want to know what I think?" he said. "Not really, but I have a feeling you're going to tell me anyway. I think you're so used to being the person in charge that you don't know how to be anything else. And when things fell apart, you didn't know how to ask for help." She didn't respond right away. Then she said, "You're right. I don't know how to ask for help. So learn. It's not that simple." "Sure it is. You just say the words." She turned to face him, her eyes catching the light. "Okay, help me." "With what?" "I don't know. Everything. How to be a person instead of a brand. How to sit still without feeling like I'm failing. How to not hate myself for being weak." "You're not weak, Vivian." "I walked a mile through a blizzard and almost died. That's pretty weak." "No, that's survival. Weak would have been staying in the car." She stared at him. "I don't understand you." "Join the club. You should hate me. After everything, you should hate me." "Maybe I did, for a while. And now? Now I'm too tired to hate anyone." She smiled, sad and small. "That's depressingly honest." "Yeah, well, it's 3 a.m. in a freezing cabin. I don't have the energy to lie." They fell silent again, the fire crackling between them. Elsie shifted in her sleep, curling closer to Vivian, her small hand reaching out to grab Vivian's arm. Vivian froze, like she didn't know what to do. Then slowly she adjusted the blankets around Elsie, tucking her in. "She trusts you," Adrian said. She shouldn't. She doesn't know me. Kids are better judges of character than adults. They don't have all the baggage getting in the way. What if I let her down? Then you'll deal with it, same as the rest of us. Vivian looked at Elsie, really looked at her, and something in her face shifted, softened. She deserves better than this. Better than being stuck in a freezing cabin with two messed up adults. She's got me. That's enough. Is it? Adrian felt the question land harder than she probably meant it. Has to be. They didn't talk after that. Just lay there in the darkness, three bodies pressed together for warmth, listening to the storm rage outside. Adrian dozed off sometime after 4, his sleep restless and thin. He dreamed about Sarah, which didn't happen as often anymore, but still hurt when it did. In the dream, she was standing in the snow outside the cabin, knocking on the door. He kept trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. She kept knocking, getting quieter each time, and he kept pulling at the door handle, screaming her name. He woke with a start, gasping. The fire had burned down to embers again. The cabin was dark and cold. Beside him, Elsie was still asleep, but on her other side, Vivian was sitting up, her arms wrapped around her knees. You okay? She whispered. Yeah. Bad dream. About her? He didn't ask how she knew. Yeah. I'm sorry. It happens. Vivian looked at the dying fire. We should add wood. I know. But he didn't move, just sat there trying to shake off the dream. I'll do it, Vivian said. You don't have to. I know, but I want to. She climbed out from under the blankets and moved to the woodpile, selecting a few pieces and carrying them to the stove. She opened the door carefully, like she was afraid she'd break something, and placed the wood on the embers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a flame caught, small at first, then growing. There, she said, sitting back. Not bad. I'm a quick learner. Adrian pulled the blankets back over Elsie, making sure she was covered. You should try to sleep. Can't. My brain won't shut off. What are you thinking about? Everything. Nothing. How I ended up here. What happens next. One thing at a time, Vivian. That's not how my brain works. Then make it work that way. Because if you spiral right now, you're no good to anyone. She looked at him, something sharp in her eyes. Is that what you did when she died? Just not think about it? No. I thought about it constantly. Nearly destroyed me. So what changed? Elsie. She needed me functional, so I got functional. That simple? That's simple. Vivian shook her head. I don't have anyone who needs me like that. Maybe that's the problem. She didn't answer, just stared at the fire. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows hard enough that Adrian thought one might break. He tensed, listening, but the glass held. Barely. Adrian? Vivian's voice was small. Yeah? I'm scared. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the expensive clothes she'd arrived in, past the polish and the power, past everything that made her Vivian Vale. He just saw a woman who was terrified and trying not to show it. Me too, he said. She looked surprised. You are? Yeah, but being scared doesn't change what we have to do, so we do it anyway. What do we have to do? Make it to morning. That's it. That's the whole plan. And if we don't, we will. She studied his face, looking for the lie, but he didn't give her one, because it wasn't a lie. They would make it. They had to. Vivian nodded slowly, then lay back down beside Elsie. Okay. Okay. The night crawled forward. Adrian stayed awake, feeding the fire every hour, watching Elsie and Vivian sleep. The cold pressed in from all sides, testing the limits of the heat they'd created, looking for weaknesses. Around 5:30, Elsie woke up shivering. Daddy? Her voice was small and scared. Right here, baby. I'm cold again. I know. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, sharing his warmth. Vivian woke too, instinctively curling around Elsie from the other side. They formed a cocoon, the three of them, with Elsie at the center. It's okay, Vivian murmured. We've got you. Elsie stopped shivering after a few minutes, her body relaxing against theirs. This is warmer. Yeah, Adrian said. It is. They stayed like that, locked together, as the first gray light of morning started to creep through the windows. The storm had finally eased. The wind had dropped to almost nothing, and through the gaps in the clouds, Adrian thought he could see a patch of blue sky. "Look," he said softly. "It's breaking." Vivian lifted her head, following his gaze. "Really?" "Yeah." Elsie squirmed between them. "Does that mean we can go outside?" "Not yet, but soon." "And Vivian's car?" Adrian met Vivian's eyes over Elsie's head. "We'll figure it out." Vivian nodded, something like hope flickering across her face. They lay there as the light grew stronger, as the storm finally released its hold on the mountain, as the cabin began to feel less like a trap and more like shelter. And in that moment, pressed together under layers of blankets, Adrian felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close. Something like the first thaw after a long winter. "We made it," Vivian whispered. "Yeah," Adrian said, "we did." By 8 in the morning, the blue patch of sky had spread across half the horizon, and the silence outside was almost unnatural after 3 days of wind. Adrian stood at the window, coffee in hand, real coffee, made on the stove now that he could afford to burn a little extra wood, and watched sunlight break through the clouds for the first time since Vivian had appeared on his porch. Behind him, Elsie was chattering to Vivian about her stuffed rabbit's complex backstory, something involving a kingdom of woodland creatures and a war over acorns. Vivian was listening, or at least doing a good impression of it, nodding in the right places while she folded blankets. "Can we go outside now?" Elsie asked, turning to Adrian. "Not yet. Snow's still too deep." But the storm stopped. "Storm stopping doesn't mean it's safe, baby. We need to wait a little longer." Elsie's face fell, but she didn't argue. She'd learned over the past few days that when her dad said wait, he meant it. Vivian stood up, carrying an armful of blankets toward the bedroom. She moved carefully, still favoring her left foot. The swelling had gone down, but Adrian could tell it hurt. "You should stay off that," he said. "I'm fine." "You keep saying that, because I keep being fine." He turned back to the window. "Stubborn. Runs in the family. Or it did." There was weight in those last 3 words, and Adrian didn't miss it. He glanced over his shoulder at her. "You want to talk about it?" "About what?" "Whatever it is you're not saying." Vivian set the blankets down on the couch and sat beside them. "Not particularly." "Fair enough." But she kept talking anyway, her voice quieter. "My mother died. 2 years ago. Heart attack." Adrian turned to face her fully. "I didn't know that." "Why would you? We weren't exactly keeping in touch." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. We weren't close. Hadn't been for years, but it was still... It changed things." Elsie had gone quiet, sensing the shift in tone. She climbed onto the couch next to Vivian, hugging her rabbit. "How did it change things?" Adrian asked. Vivian looked down at her hands. "She left me everything, the company, the properties, all of it, and I thought I could handle it. Thought I could just step in and keep everything running the way she did, but I couldn't." "Why not?" "Because I'm not her, and because the whole thing was built on lies and manipulation and cutting people down to make herself bigger. I tried to do it differently, tried to be better, but the harder I tried, the more it all fell apart." "So you walked away?" "So I ran away. There's a difference." Adrian crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her. "What happened, specifically?" She took a breath. "The board voted me out 3 weeks ago. Said I was making decisions that hurt the bottom line. Said I was too soft, too emotional. They offered me a settlement to step down quietly, and I took it because I was too tired to fight." "How much?" "Enough to never have to work again. Enough to buy a dozen cabins like this one. Enough that it doesn't matter." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Turns out money doesn't fix anything when you hate yourself." Elsie reached out and patted Vivian's hand. "I don't think you should hate yourself." Vivian's eyes went wet. "Thank you, sweetie. My mommy used to say that everybody makes mistakes. She said that's how we learn." Adrian felt his throat tighten. He hadn't known Elsie remembered those kinds of things Sarah used to say. "Your mommy sounds like she was very smart," Vivian said softly. "She was. She knew lots of stuff." "What kind of stuff?" "About trees and birds and how to make really good pancakes. And she was nice to everybody, even when they were mean to her." Vivian looked at Adrian over Elsie's head, and he saw the question there. He nodded slightly. Yeah, Sarah had been like that. It It was one of the things that had made losing her so hard. She'd been good in a way most people weren't. She sounds wonderful, Vivian said. She was. But then she got sick and died. Daddy was really sad for a long time. Elsie, Adrian started. It's okay, Daddy. I know you were sad. You still get sad sometimes, I can tell. He didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to tell his 6-year-old daughter that, yes, he still got sad, probably would for the rest of his life, and that was just how it worked. Vivian saved him. It's okay to be sad when you lose someone you love. It means they mattered. That's what Daddy says too. Your daddy's a smart man. Elsie nodded solemnly, then climbed off the couch. Can I play outside yet? Still no, baby. She sighed dramatically and went to her blocks. Adrian and Vivian sat in silence for a moment. Then Adrian said, That why you came up here? Because of the company? Partly. Mostly. I don't know. Everything just piled up. The company, my mother, being alone all the time. I woke up 3 days ago and realized I hadn't talked to a real person. Not an assistant or a board member, but a real person. In weeks. Maybe months. And I couldn't do it anymore. So you got in your car. So I got in my car, didn't even pack a bag. Just started driving and kept going until the storm caught me. And you thought of me. I thought of the one person who'd ever told me I was full of shit and meant it as a kindness. Adrian almost smiled. When did I do that? At your dad's funeral. You told me I was full of shit for pretending like everything was fine when it wasn't. You said I owed him more than that. I was angry. You were right. He looked at her, this woman who'd shown up half dead on his porch, who'd spent the last 3 days huddled in his cabin surviving a storm, who was maybe just starting to figure out that wealth and power couldn't insulate you from being human. What are you going to do? He asked. When the road's clear? I don't know. I can't go back to the city. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I can't stay here. Why not? She looked startled. Because this is your life, you and Elsie. I can't just... I'm not saying move in permanently. I'm saying you don't have to leave right away. Roads are going to take days to clear. Maybe a week. You could stay until you figure out what comes next. Adrian? No pressure. No expectations. Just a place to catch your breath. She stared at him like he'd spoken another language. Why would you do that? Because you need it. And because spite gets exhausting after a while. I destroyed your father. No, your mother did. You were just there. That's not how you felt 7 years ago. 7 years ago, I needed someone to blame. You were convenient, but I'm tired, Vivian. I'm tired of being angry, and I'm tired of carrying all this weight around. So yeah, stay if you want. Or don't. Either way, I'm done punishing you for someone else's choices. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. I don't deserve that. Probably not, but I'm offering anyway. Vivian looked down at her hands, and Adrian could see her struggling with something. Finally, she said, Okay. Okay? I'll stay. For a few days, until I figure out what comes next. Good. They sat there for a moment, the weight of the decision settling around them. Then Elsie appeared with her coat on. Can I go outside now? Adrian checked his watch. Yeah, but stay on the porch. She was out the door before he finished the sentence. He and Vivian followed, stepping out into air so cold it burned going down. The sun was fully out now, turning the snow into a blanket of diamonds. It was beautiful in that way nature could be when it wasn't actively trying to kill you. Elsie was already making a snowman, or trying to. The snow was too powdery to pack right, but she didn't seem to care. She just kept pushing it into a pile and patting it down, narrating the process to herself. She's resilient, Vivian said, leaning against the porch railing. She has to be. That's a lot of pressure for a kid. It's the world we're in. Vivian watched Elsie work, something wistful crossing her face. I never wanted kids. Yeah? Too complicated, too permanent. I always thought I'd be a terrible mother. Probably. She laughed, surprised. You're not supposed to agree with me. Why not? You're probably right. Most people are terrible at it. I'm barely holding it together most days. You seem like you're doing fine. That's because you've only seen the crisis management version. Wait until she has a tantrum about the wrong color cup. Then you'll see the truth. Which is? That I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just making it up as I go and hoping it doesn't screw her up too badly. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said, For what it's worth, I think you're doing better than you think. Based on what? 3 days? Based on the fact that she feels safe enough to be a kid. That's not nothing. Adrian didn't respond. Didn't know how to. So he just watched Elsie play, watched her small hands push snow around, watched her create something out of nothing because that's what kids did. They built worlds in wreckage and didn't think twice about it. The day unfolded slowly, the way days do when there's nothing to rush toward. Adrian shoveled a path from the cabin to the shed, then to the truck, even though the truck wasn't going anywhere for days. Vivian helped where she could, carrying tools, holding the door, doing the small things that made the work go faster. Elsie built her snow pile into something vaguely person-shaped and declared it a success. By afternoon, the temperature had climbed to almost 20 degrees, which felt tropical after the past few days. Adrian got the generator running again, rationing the last of the fuel, and they had enough electricity for a few hours of normalcy. Elsie watched half a movie. Adrian checked his phone. Still no signal. Vivian just sat by the window, staring out at the trees. "What are you thinking about?" Adrian asked. "How quiet it is up here." "That bother you?" "No. It's just different. In the city, there's always noise, cars, construction, people. I forgot what silence sounded like." "You get used to it." "Do you like it? The quiet?" He thought about it. Sometimes it's too much. Because it makes you think." "Yeah." She turned to look at him. "What do you think about?" "Sarah mostly, what I could have done differently. Whether moving up here was the right call. Whether I'm enough for Elsie." "You are." "You don't know that. I've watched you with her. You're enough." He wanted to believe her. Some days he almost did. That evening, Adrian made dinner, pasta with canned tomato sauce and the last of the frozen vegetables. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot, and there was enough of it, and they ate at the table like a normal family. Except they weren't a family. They were three people thrown together by circumstance, trying to figure out what happened next. After dinner, Elsie asked Vivian to read to her again. They settled on the couch, Elsie curled against Vivian's side, and Vivian read with the same patient attention she'd shown before. Adrian cleaned up, listening to the soft rhythm of Vivian's voice, and felt something in his chest loosen. Maybe this was okay. Maybe this strange, temporary arrangement was exactly what all of them needed. When the story ended, Elsie yawned. "I'm tired." "Bedtime," Adrian said. "Can Vivian tuck me in?" He glanced at Vivian, who looked surprised. "If she wants to." "I'd like that," Vivian said. They went to Elsie's room together, and Adrian stayed in the living room, giving them space. He could hear their voices through the door. Elsie's high and chattery, Vivian's soft and careful. Then silence. Then the door opened and Vivian came out, her eyes red. "You okay?" Adrian asked. "She told me she was glad I crashed my car." "What?" "She said if I hadn't crashed, I wouldn't be here, and she likes having me here. And then she asked if I could stay forever." Adrian rubbed his face. "She gets attached fast." "What did you tell her? About me?" "Just that you needed help, that you'd be here for a little while." "What if a little while isn't enough?" He looked at her. "For her or for you?" "Both." "I don't know, Vivian. I don't have answers for that." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Sorry, I'm not usually this much of a mess." "You're doing fine." "I cried 3 times today. That's not fine." "You survived a blizzard. You're allowed to cry." She laughed, watery and broken. "You're kinder than I remembered." "I'm not kind. I'm just tired of being angry." "There's a difference?" "Probably not." They sat down on the couch, the fire crackling between them and the rest of the world. Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. "Can I ask you something?" Vivian said. "Okay." "Why did you really let me stay?" "The truth." Adrian thought about it. "Because when you knocked on that door, I saw someone who'd run out of options. And I've been there. Different circumstances, same feeling, and I remembered what it was like when people turned their backs because it was easier than helping. So I didn't turn my back. Even though I deserved it. Maybe. But that's not how I want to be. Not anymore." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he saw something other than fear or exhaustion in her eyes. He saw gratitude. Real, unguarded gratitude. Thank you, she said quietly. You keep saying that. Because I keep meaning it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn down. Then Vivian spoke again, her voice hesitant. Can I tell you something? Sure. I was engaged. Last year. To someone my mother approved of. Someone who looked good on paper and said the right things at the right times. And 3 months before the wedding, I realized I didn't even like him. I barely knew him. We'd spent 2 years together, and I couldn't tell you his favorite color or what he was afraid of or what made him happy, because none of that mattered to either of us. It was just a transaction. What did you do? I called it off. He was relieved. I think we both were. But my mother was furious, said I was throwing away my future, said I'd never find anyone who could handle my lifestyle. And maybe she was right. She wasn't. You don't know that. I know that marrying someone you don't even like is a guaranteed way to end up miserable. You did the right thing. It didn't feel right. It felt like failing. That's because you were measuring yourself by the wrong standards. She pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself small. I don't know what the right standards are anymore. I spent so long trying to be what everyone else wanted that I forgot to figure out what I wanted. So, figure it out now. How? I don't know. Start small. What do you want for breakfast tomorrow? She blinked at him. What? Breakfast. What do you want? I don't know. Whatever you're making. That's not an answer. Pick something. She thought about it like it was the hardest question she'd ever been asked. Eggs scrambled with toast. See? That wasn't so hard. That's not the same as figuring out my life. No, but it's a start. She smiled, small but real. You're very practical. Someone has to be. They talked for another hour, about nothing and everything. Vivian told him about the company, about the people who'd worked for her and the ones who'd worked against her, about the meetings that lasted 6 hours and accomplished nothing, about the feeling of sitting in a penthouse overlooking the city and feeling completely alone. Adrian told her about Sarah, about the months of chemo that didn't work and the day he'd realized she wasn't going to make it, about Elsie's nightmares in the first year after, about learning to braid hair and pack lunches and be both parents at once. It was the most honest conversation Adrian had had in years, and it surprised him how easy it was. How Vivian listened without trying to fix things, without offering empty platitudes, just listened like his words mattered. By the time they went to bed, Vivian in his room again, Adrian on the couch, it was past midnight. The cabin was warm, the fire steady, and for the first time since the storm started, Adrian felt like they might actually be okay. The next morning brought another clear sky and the sound of a snowplow on the main road, miles away but audible in the stillness. Adrian stood on the porch, drinking coffee, listening to the distant rumble of machinery. The roads were being cleared, which meant in a day or two, maybe 3, the path up to the cabin would be passable, which meant decisions needed to be made. Vivian joined him, wrapped in blankets, her hair a mess. Is that what I think it is? Yeah, they're starting to clear the roads. How long? Couple days before they get up here. Maybe less if we're lucky. She didn't say anything, just stood there looking out at the snow-covered mountains. You thought about what you're going to do? Adrian asked. Not really. You should probably start. I know. Elsie burst out onto the porch, already bundled in her coat. Can we go look for Vivian's car? Adrian glanced at Vivian. You up for a walk? I think so. They bundled up and set out, following the road down the mountain. The snow was deep, but Adrian had broken a path the day before, and they made decent progress. Elsie ran ahead, making footprints, turning every 50 feet to make sure they were following. They found the car about a mile down, just where Vivian said it would be. It was completely buried, just a vague shape under the snow. Adrian brushed off the windshield and peered inside. Everything looked intact. Think it'll start? Vivian asked. Maybe, if the battery's not dead. And if it is? Then we'll jump it with my truck. Get it back to the cabin. You can call for a tow once the roads are clear. She nodded, staring at the car like it was a relic from another life. Which Adrian supposed it was. You okay? He asked. Yeah, just weird seeing it. Feels like it's been months instead of days. A lot can change in a few days. Yeah. She turned to look at him. It really can. They walked back to the cabin slowly, Elsie between them, holding both their hands. The sun was bright, the air was crisp, and for a moment it almost felt normal, almost felt like they were a family, out for a winter walk instead of three people still figuring out how they fit together. That night, after Elsie was asleep, Adrian and Vivian sat by the fire again. It was becoming a routine, this quiet time after the day ended, and Adrian found he looked forward to it. "I talked to my lawyer today," Vivian said. She'd used Adrian's phone earlier, standing on the porch where the signal was strongest. "About the settlement." "And?" "It's done. Papers are signed. I'm officially unemployed." "How does that feel?" "Terrifying. Freeing. Both." "What are you going to do with the money?" "I don't know. Give most of it away, probably. Keep enough to live on. Start over somewhere." "Where?" She looked at him. "I was hoping you might have some ideas." Adrian felt his heart skip. "Vivian, I'm not asking to stay here permanently. I know that's too much, but maybe nearby? Somewhere I could, I don't know, learn how to be a person again, and maybe see Elsie sometimes, if that's okay." He didn't answer right away. Couldn't. Because the truth was, some part of him had been hoping she'd ask. Some part of him had gotten used to having her here, to the sound of her voice in the morning and the way she listened to Elsie's stories like they were the most important things in the world. "There's a town about 30 miles from here," he said finally. "Small, quiet. They've got a few rentals. Nothing fancy." "I don't need fancy." "You sure about that?" "I'm sure about what I don't want anymore. The rest I can figure out." Adrian nodded slowly. "Okay. Okay? Yeah, stay nearby. See what happens. But no promises, Vivian. I've got Elsie to think about, and I'm not going to let her get hurt." "I understand. And if you decide this isn't for you, if you wake up in a month and realize you hate it here, you leave. No guilt, no drama. You just go." "Okay. I'm serious. I know you are, and I'm saying okay." They sat with that for a while, the fire crackling, the future spreading out in front of them, uncertain and terrifying, and maybe, just maybe, worth trying for. "Thank you," Vivian said quietly, "for giving me a chance I don't deserve." "Stop saying you don't deserve things. You're starting to sound like a broken record." She laughed. "Okay, then thank you for giving me a chance I'm going to try really hard not to screw up." Better. The night stretched on, comfortable and warm, and Adrian realized something had shifted. The anger he'd carried for 7 years, the bitterness that had kept him company on lonely nights, was gone. Not forgotten, exactly, just transformed into something else. Something that felt like forgiveness, or close enough. And maybe that was enough. The snowplow reached their road on the 3rd day after the storm broke. Adrian heard it before he saw it. The grinding scrape of metal on asphalt, the beep of the truck backing up, the shouts of the crew working their way up the mountain. He stood on the porch with his coffee, watching the orange lights flash through the trees getting closer. Behind him, the cabin door opened. Vivian stepped out, wrapped in one of his old flannel shirts over her borrowed clothes. "They're here," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." She stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I should probably call about my car." "Probably." "And figure out where I'm staying." "Yeah." Neither of them moved. The plow came into view around the bend, its blade scraping a path through snow that had packed down to ice. The driver waved as he passed, and Adrian waved back. Normal. Ordinary. The world reconnecting itself after being cut off. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Vivian said quietly. "Now that we're not trapped anymore." "Everything's different when you have a choice." She looked at him. "Is that what this is? A choice? What else would it be?" "I don't know. Maybe necessity. Maybe just two people making the best of a bad situation." Adrian turned to face her fully. "Is that what you think this is?" "I don't know what to think. A week ago I was sure of everything. Now I'm not sure of anything." "Welcome to the club." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "What if I screw this up?" "Then you screw it up, and we deal with it." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Elsie appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her hair sticking up in every direction. "Can I have pancakes?" "I thought you wanted eggs," Adrian said. "I changed my mind. I want pancakes now. Vivian laughed, and it was a real laugh this time. She knows what she wants. She's 6. Everything's simple when you're 6. They went inside and Adrian made pancakes while Vivian helped Elsie get dressed. He could hear them in the bedroom, Elsie chattering about which shirt to wear, Vivian offering gentle suggestions. It sounded domestic, natural, like they'd been doing this for years instead of days. It scared him how much he wanted it to be real. After breakfast, Adrian and Vivian took his truck down to where her car was buried. The plow had cleared the main road, but the shoulder was still packed with snow. They spent an hour digging it out, Adrian with the shovel, Vivian clearing the windows and door handles. When they finally got it exposed, Adrian could see the damage. The front bumper was crumpled, the headlight on the driver's side smashed. The car had hit something hard, probably a tree or a boulder hidden under the snow. It's not totaled, he said, but it's not driving anywhere without repairs. Vivian circled the car slowly, taking in the damage. I can't believe I walked away from this. You got lucky. I got saved. There's a difference. He didn't argue. They got the hood open and checked the engine. Everything looked intact. Adrian tried the ignition, and after a few attempts, it turned over. The battery was weak but functional. We can jump it and get it back to the cabin, he said. Then you can call for a tow when you're ready. Okay? They drove the truck back, hooked up the jumper cables, and brought Vivian's car to life. It sputtered and complained, but it ran. Adrian followed her back up the mountain, watching her navigate the icy road carefully, and felt an unexpected relief when they both pulled into the clearing by the cabin. Elsie was building a snow fort on the porch, using a bucket to pack blocks of snow. She looked up when the cars arrived. You fixed it, she called. Sort of, Vivian said, getting out. It needs more work. Can you stay until it's really fixed? Vivian glanced at Adrian. I think so, if that's okay. It's okay, Adrian said. Elsie went back to her fort, satisfied. That afternoon, while Elsie napped, Adrian and Vivian sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, looking at rental listings in the town 30 miles away. Most of them were terrible, overpriced, rundown, or both. But there was one, a small house on the edge of town with a porch and a yard that looked promising. It's not much, Vivian said, studying the photos. It's more than a lot of people have. I know, I've never lived anywhere like this. You're going to hate it. She looked up, startled. What? I'm serious. You're going to hate it. It's going to be boring and quiet and nothing like what you're used to. And about 2 weeks in, you're going to wake up and wonder what the hell you were thinking. You don't know that. I do, because I did the same thing. When I moved up here after Sarah died, I thought I wanted the quiet, thought I wanted to be away from everything. And for the first month, I was miserable. I hated the silence, hated the isolation, hated that there was no one around to distract me from my own head. What changed? Elsie. She needed stability, and I was all she had. So I stopped hating it and started figuring out how to live with it. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I don't have an Elsie. No, but you've got yourself, and maybe that's enough. Is it? I don't know. You'll have to figure that out. She looked back at the laptop, at the photo of the little house with its peeling paint and crooked shutters. Can I see it before I decide? Sure. We can drive down tomorrow if you want. Okay. That evening, after dinner, Vivian asked if she could help give Elsie a bath. Adrian said yes, mostly because he was curious to see how it would go. He listened from the living room as Elsie splashed and giggled, as Vivian patiently washed her hair and answered questions about everything from why soap made bubbles to whether fish got cold in winter. When they emerged, Elsie wrapped in a towel, Vivian's shirt was soaked and her hair was dripping. She's enthusiastic, Vivian said. That's one word for it. Elsie ran to her room to get dressed, and Vivian stood there looking lost. You did good, Adrian said. I got more water on myself than on her. That's how you know you're doing it right. She smiled, wringing out her hair over the sink. I've never done anything like this before. Like what? Any of it. The bath, the bedtime stories, just being around a kid. It's terrifying. You're doing fine. I don't feel fine. I feel like I'm going to break her somehow. You're not going to break her. She's tougher than she looks. Vivian dried her hands on a towel, her movements slow and deliberate. What if I'm not tough enough? What if I can't do this? Any of this? Adrian leaned against the counter watching her. Then you figure it out. Same as everyone else. There's no manual for this stuff, Vivian. You just do it and hope you don't screw up too badly. That's not very reassuring. It's honest. She looked at him, and he saw the fear there, the doubt. But underneath it, he also saw something else. Determination, hope. The fragile beginnings of belief that maybe she could do this after all. Okay, she said quietly. I'll try. That's all anyone can do. The next morning, they drove to the town. It was bigger than Adrian had made it sound. 2 stoplights, a grocery store, a diner, a hardware store, and a handful of other businesses clustered along Main Street. Elsie pressed her face against the truck window, pointing at everything. Can we get ice cream? She asked. It's 10 in the morning, Adrian said. So? So no. But Vivian wants ice cream, don't you, Vivian? Vivian laughed. I'm staying out of this one. They met the landlord at the rental house, a tired-looking man named Roy, who smelled like cigarettes and didn't ask many questions. He showed them around, pointing out the features like he was reading from a script. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. Kitchen with appliances that worked most of the time. Heating that was adequate. Rent due on the 1st. The house was small and dated with carpet that had seen better days and walls that needed paint. But it was clean and the bones were solid, and when Vivian stood in the living room looking out the window at the yard, Adrian could see her trying to picture it. What do you think? He asked. It's not what I'm used to. That's not an answer. She turned to face him. I think I could make it work. You sure? No, but I'm going to try anyway. Roy was waiting by the door, keys in hand. You want it or not? Vivian took a breath. I want it. First and last month up front. No pets, no smoking. That's fine. You got a job? Not yet. Roy looked skeptical, but Vivian pulled out her phone and showed him her bank account. His eyebrows went up. Okay then, I'll get the paperwork. They signed the lease at the diner over coffee and pie. Elsie got chocolate ice cream despite Adrian's earlier refusal, mostly because Vivian ordered it for her, and Adrian didn't have the heart to say no. You're a terrible influence, he told Vivian. She deserves ice cream. We all deserve ice cream. It's barely noon. So? Elsie giggled, her face covered in chocolate. Adrian shook his head, but he was smiling. They drove back to the cabin with Vivian officially a resident of Colorado. It felt surreal. A week ago, she'd been a billionaire executive with an office on the 42nd floor. Now she was signing a lease for a rental house in a town of 3,000 people. You really doing this? Adrian asked as they pulled up to the cabin. Looks like it. You know you can still back out. Roy will find another tenant. I don't want to back out. Even though it's crazy? Especially because it's crazy. Elsie unbuckled herself and scrambled out of the truck. Can Vivian come over for dinner every night? Els, she's going to have her own house. She doesn't need to be here every night. But I want her to be. Vivian knelt down to Elsie's level. How about this? I'll come over sometimes, and sometimes you can come visit me. Would that be okay? Elsie thought about it. Can I help you decorate? Absolutely. Okay. She ran inside, satisfied. Adrian and Vivian stood by the truck, the mountain air cold and clear around them. Thank you, Vivian said, for all of this. For not giving up on me. You keep thanking me. It's getting old. I mean it, though. You saved my life, literally, and the other way, too. You saved yourself. I just gave you a place to do it. She shook her head. You gave me more than that. You gave me a reason to try. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They spent the rest of the day making plans. Vivian would stay at the cabin for another week while she got furniture and supplies for the house. Adrian would help her move when she was ready. Elsie would help pick out curtains. It felt real, solid, like something that might actually work. That night, after Elsie was asleep, Adrian and Vivian sat by the fire one last time as housemates. Tomorrow she'd start the process of moving into her own space, and this strange temporary arrangement would shift into something else, something undefined. I'm scared, Vivian admitted. Of what? That I'll mess this up, that I'll wake up in a month and realize I can't do it, that I'll let Elsie down, that I'll let you down. Then you'll deal with it, and we'll help. Why? Why would you help me after everything? Adrian stared at the fire, choosing his words carefully. Because I spent 7 years being angry at you for things you didn't do, and because my daughter likes you, and because somewhere in the last week I stopped seeing you as the enemy and started seeing you as just a person. A person who's trying to figure it out, same as me. I don't deserve that. Stop saying that. But it's true. No, it's not. You made mistakes. Your family made bigger mistakes. But you're here now, trying to do better. That counts for something. Vivian's eyes went wet. I don't know how to do this. How to be normal. No one's normal. We're all just pretending and hoping no one notices. She laughed through her tears. That's depressing. That's life. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling, the night pressing close around the cabin. Outside, the world was frozen and still, holding its breath. Adrian? Vivian's voice was soft. Yeah? What happened between your dad and my mother? I can't fix that. I can't undo it. But I want you to know I'm sorry. Not just for what she did, but for not standing up, for being a coward. You were 20 years old. That's not an excuse. Maybe not. But it's context. She looked at him, searching his face for something. Forgiveness, maybe. Or just understanding. I forgive you, he said simply. I don't know when it happened. Maybe during the storm. Maybe when you read to Elsie. Maybe just now. But I do. Vivian's breath hitched. Thank you. Stop thanking me. I can't help it. Try. She smiled, wiping her eyes. Okay, I'll try. The week passed quickly. Too quickly. They drove to the furniture store in the next town over and bought the basics. A bed, a couch, a table, and chairs. Nothing fancy. Nothing that screamed Vivian Vale, billionaire heiress. Just simple, functional pieces that would turn the rental house into a home. Elsie came along for everything, offering opinions on colors and patterns, with the absolute certainty of someone who'd never doubted herself. Vivian listened to every suggestion, taking notes on her phone, and Adrian watched them together and felt something shift in his chest. This could work. This strange, unlikely arrangement. It could actually work. Moving day was chaos. Adrian and Vivian made trip after trip between the cabin and the house, hauling boxes and furniture, while Elsie supervised and offered unhelpful advice. By late afternoon, the house was full of Vivian's things, and she stood in the middle of the living room looking overwhelmed. It's a lot, she said. It's a start, Adrian corrected. Elsie was in the bedroom arranging stuffed animals on the bed that Vivian had bought specifically because Elsie said they needed a place to sit. She's going to want to spend every weekend here, Adrian said. Is that okay? As long as you're okay with it. I want her here. I want to be part of this. Part of her life. If you'll let me. Adrian looked at her, this woman who'd crashed into his life during a blizzard, who'd nearly died and then fought her way back, who was trying, despite everything, to build something real. Yeah, he said. I'll let you. Vivian's eyes went bright again, but this time she didn't cry. She just smiled. They ordered pizza for dinner and ate it sitting on the floor because Vivian hadn't bought a coffee table yet. Elsie talked nonstop about what else the house needed. Curtains with stars, a bird feeder for the yard, a bookshelf for all the books they were going to read together. We? Vivian asked. Yeah, you and me and Daddy. We're going to read so many books. Adrian met Vivian's eyes over Elsie's head, and they shared a look that said everything they weren't saying out loud. This was happening. They were doing this. And somehow, impossibly, it felt right. After dinner, they drove back to the cabin. Elsie fell asleep in the truck, and Adrian carried her inside, tucking her into bed while Vivian waited in the living room. When he came back out, she was standing by the window, looking out at the darkness. You okay? He asked. Yeah, just thinking. About? About how a week ago I thought my life was over, and now I'm starting something new, something I never would have imagined. Regret it? No, I'm terrified. But no. Good. She turned to face him. I should go, get settled in. You don't have to. You could stay, just for tonight. Adrian, as friends, no pressure, just, I don't know. It feels weird you leaving. She smiled. It does, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay, I'll stay. So she did. One more night in the cabin, sleeping in Adrian's room while he took the couch. One more morning of coffee and breakfast and Elsie's chatter filling the spaces between them. And when Vivian finally left, driving her repaired car down the mountain toward her new house, Adrian stood on the porch watching her go and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The weeks turned into months, and the arrangement settled into a rhythm. Vivian came for dinner twice a week. Elsie spent Saturday afternoons at Vivian's house, helping with projects that mostly involved making messes. Adrian stopped by when Vivian needed help fixing things, which was often because the house was old and constantly breaking. Slowly, carefully, they built something none of them had planned for. Not a family, exactly, not yet, but something close, something that felt like possibility. Vivian got a job at the local library, shelving books and helping with the children's reading program. It didn't pay much, but she didn't need much. And she was good at it, patient with the kids, enthusiastic about the stories. She started seeing a therapist in the next town over, working through the wreckage of her old life. Some days were harder than others. Some days she called Adrian in tears, saying she couldn't do it, couldn't handle the quiet, couldn't figure out who she was supposed to be. And he'd talk her down, remind her that figuring it out was the whole point, that nobody had it all together no matter what they looked like from the outside. Spring came, bringing mud and melting snow and the promise of green things growing. Elsie's birthday arrived, and Vivian threw her a party at her house with cake and decorations and too many presents. 6 kids from town showed up, and they ran screaming through the yard while Adrian and Vivian supervised from the porch. "This is insane," Vivian said, watching a small boy try to climb a tree. "This is childhood. How do you do this every day?" "I don't. I just do today. Tomorrow I'll do tomorrow." She looked at him. "That's your answer for everything." "It's the only answer that works." Later, after the kids had gone home and Elsie was crashed on the couch in a sugar coma, Adrian and Vivian cleaned up the disaster in the kitchen. "Thank you," Adrian said, "for doing this. She had a great time." "I wanted to. She deserves it." "So do you." Vivian looked up from the dishes. "What? You deserve this. The house. The job. The life you're building. I know you don't believe it yet, but you do." Her throat worked. "I'm trying to." "I know, and you're doing good." She set down the dish she was washing and turned to face him fully. "Can I tell you something?" "Sure." "I'm happy. For the first time in I don't even know how long, I'm actually happy." Adrian felt his chest tighten. "Good. You should be. Because of you. And Elsie. You gave me a reason to keep going. We didn't give you anything. You did the work. You gave me the chance to do the work. That's not nothing." They stood there in the kitchen, the evening light slanting through the window, and Adrian realized something had changed between them. The anger was gone. The bitterness was gone. What was left was something quieter, something that looked a lot like friendship. Maybe even more than that, if he was being honest. But he wasn't ready to think about that yet. Wasn't ready to risk what they'd built by wanting more. So he just said, "You're welcome." And Vivian smiled. Summer arrived with heat and long days, and Elsie running wild through the mountains. She and Vivian went on hikes, learned to identify birds, planted a garden in Vivian's backyard that produced exactly 3 tomatoes and a lot of weeds. Adrian watched them together and saw his daughter blossoming in ways he hadn't expected. She was braver now, more confident. She talked about Vivian the way she talked about her favorite things, with absolute certainty that this person belonged in her life. And Vivian changed too. The sharp edges softened, the fear in her eyes faded. She laughed more, relaxed more, became someone Adrian barely recognized from the woman who'd collapsed on his porch 6 months ago. One evening in August, they sat on Vivian's porch, while Elsie caught fireflies in the yard. The air was warm, the sky turning purple and gold, and everything felt suspended in that perfect moment before night fell. "I've been thinking," Vivian said. About staying, permanently. Not just the rental. Maybe buying something, putting down real roots." Adrian felt his heart skip. "Yeah?" "Yeah, if that's okay. I know this was supposed to be temporary. It's okay." "You sure?" "I'm sure." She looked relieved. "I wasn't sure if you'd want me to. If maybe I was overstaying my welcome." "You're not. Because I could go. If you needed me to, I could find somewhere else. Vivian, stop. I want you here. Elsie wants you here, so stay. She studied his face, looking for the truth, and whatever she found there made her smile. Okay, I'll stay. Elsie ran up to the porch, jar of fireflies in hand. Look how many I caught. That's a lot, Vivian said. Can I keep them? They'll die if you keep them. You have to let them go. Elsie's face fell. But I want to keep them. I know, but sometimes loving something means letting it be free. Elsie thought about that, then nodded seriously and opened the jar. The fireflies rose into the darkening sky, blinking like tiny stars. Bye, fireflies, Elsie called. Come back tomorrow, okay? Adrian met Vivian's eyes and they shared a smile. That night, after they'd driven home and put Elsie to bed, Adrian sat on his porch alone and thought about everything that had happened. About the storm, about Vivian showing up half dead, about the weeks and months that had followed, turning strangers into something like family. He thought about Sarah, too, about whether she would have approved of this. And he decided she would have. She'd always been better at forgiveness than he was, better at seeing the good in people. His phone buzzed, a text from Vivian. Thank you for tonight, for everything. I mean it. He typed back, stop thanking me. Never. He smiled and put the phone away. The months continued to pass. Fall came with leaves turning gold and red, with cooler nights and the smell of wood smoke. Vivian's one-year anniversary in town arrived quietly, marked only by Elsie making her a card that said Happy You Didn't Die Day in crayon. I don't know whether to laugh or cry, Vivian said, reading it. Both, Adrian suggested. They celebrated with cake at Vivian's house, the three of them sitting around the table that Elsie had helped pick out, and Adrian looked at them, at his daughter and this woman who'd somehow become essential, and felt grateful for the storm that had brought them together. Because that's what it came down to in the end. Not the money or the past or the pain they'd both carried, just the choice to open a door when someone knocked, to offer help when it was needed, to give people a chance to be better than their worst moments. What are you thinking about? Vivian asked. How strange life is. Strange good or strange bad? Strange good, she smiled. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Elsie finished her cake and announced she needed to use the bathroom. She ran off, leaving Adrian and Vivian alone. Can I ask you something? Vivian said. Sure. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't knocked on your door that night? Sometimes. What do you think? I think you probably would have died, and I would have kept being angry, and Elsie would have kept missing out on having you in her life, so I'm glad you knocked. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only came after months of learning each other's rhythms. Adrian? Vivian's voice was soft. Yeah? I love her. Elsie, I know I don't have a right to, and I know it's probably weird, but I do. It's not weird, and you have every right. Really? Really? She loves you too. She told me. Vivian's eyes went bright. She did? Yeah, said you were her favorite person except for me, which is high praise from a 7-year-old. I'm honored. You should be. Elsie came back, climbing into Vivian's lap without asking, and Vivian wrapped her arms around her automatically. They fit together like they'd been doing it for years. Adrian watched them and felt his chest tighten with something he couldn't quite name. Not quite love. Not yet. But something close. Something that felt like the beginning of forever, if he was brave enough to reach for it. But that was a thought for another day. For now, this was enough. This strange, unlikely family they'd built from wreckage and storms and second chances. It was more than enough. It was everything. Winter came around again, bringing the first snow. Not a blizzard this time, just a gentle fall that covered the mountains in white and turned the world quiet. Vivian stood on Adrian's porch, watching it fall, and he stood beside her. Remember last year? She asked. Hard to forget. I was so scared that night. I didn't think I was going to make it. But you did. Because of you. Because you were stubborn enough to walk through a storm. She laughed. Same thing. Elsie ran out onto the porch, catching snowflakes on her tongue. It's snowing. Can we build a snowman? Later, Adrian said. When there's more. Promise? Promise. She ran back inside, satisfied. Vivian turned to Adrian. I never thanked you. Not properly. You've thanked me about 1,000 times. Not for saving my life, for giving me a life worth saving. He looked at her, this woman who'd walked out of a storm and into his world, and felt something settle in his chest, something that had been restless for years. You did that yourself, he said. I just held the door open. Sometimes that's all someone needs. Yeah, sometimes it is. They stood there as the snow fell, as Elsie sang inside, as the mountains settled around them. And Adrian thought about doors, about the ones we close and the ones we open, about the people who knock and the people who answer, about how sometimes the richest person in the world is saved not by money or power or status, but by one open door, one exhausted single father, and one stormy night that changes everything. Because that's what it came down to in the end. We're all just people, broken and scared and trying our best. And sometimes, if we're lucky, someone opens a door when we need it most. And sometimes, if we're brave, we walk through. The snow kept falling, soft and steady, covering the world in white. And inside the cabin, warmth and light, and the sound of a little girl laughing. It was enough. It was everything. And it was just the beginning.